All right, let's go ahead and look at some rules for adding and subtracting integers, specifically those with negative and positive signs. So if, for instance, we were going to look at something like 3 plus 6 on a number line, it would actually be super simple looking. We have our 0. We're starting at 3. And we know that we're going to be moving up 6. In the direction of 9. So basically what's happening here is we are at our starting point, which is positive 3. The plus sign tells you the direction, which means that we're going to the right. And the next add-in tells you how many spaces you're going to be moving. So we moved 6 spaces. That would be the same as saying I have 3 counters and I'm adding 6 more. That would give me 9 counters in all. Let's look at it now as if it were a negative. Say, for instance, we had 3. And we were going to, we have negative 3. And we are going to add 6. All right, so in order to do that, we're going to draw the number line. We have 0 here in the middle, negative 3 over on the side. And we are going to put our counters down. Now, the negative counters we're going to put down as red. And let's put down positive counters as yellow. Oops. It's 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, so let's look at what happens here. Basically, when we have a negative and a positive, we're going to see that some of the counters end up canceling out. So each red counter can be canceled out by a yellow counter or a positive counter. And if we look here, that means all of these allow you to go back to 0. We no longer have negatives anymore. We now have 0, and we are left with 3 positives. Let's see if that looks the same on our number line. So we have our starting point, negative 3. So we're going to start here. And remember, the sign in the middle tells you your direction. So we're going to the right because that's the positive side of your number line. And the add-end tells you what direction or how many spaces you're going in that direction. So we are going to go 6, 1, 2, 3. There we go, back at that 0, just like we predicted with the cancellation. 4, 5, 6. We end up at positive 3, which is the same number of counters that we had left in our using the manipulatives. Let's look at another one there. Let's start with a negative 3 this time. And we're going to add a negative 6. All right, so let's try our counters here. We have negative 3. And the counters that we're going to be using are also negative. We're going to put on an additional negative 6. 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, we could go ahead and add them the way that they are. However, I want to show you on the number line what that's going to look like as well. So we have our number line. There's our 0, our -3, if we're looking here, we have our starting point of -3, and our direction here should be positive, going to the right. And our next add-in tells us how many spaces we're going to the right. Notice that it's a -6. Because it's a negative, the direction actually changes. So we're going to be going the opposite direction that we should, or we would imagine with that plus sign. Because we have the same sign for both add-ins, they're both negative, we end up putting them together and keeping that same negative sign. Same sign, keep the sign. So we are at that -3, and we are going to go backwards now because it's a negative, 6 more spaces. So that is -6 here, giving us -9 counters in the first place. And we can check that with our 3, another 3, and then the last set of 3 there, giving you a -9. Let's look at another one here. Let's say, for instance, we were looking at something super similar to this. I'm actually only going to change one part here. I'm going to change that plus sign to just a -6. Now, this is the same exact problem here. It just looks a little bit different. We still have that -3 as our starting space. The only difference is that we do not have that positive or that plus sign in the middle of the two numbers. The 6 is positive in this instance, but the direction here is negative. So we're going backwards. We end up having the same exact answer because of that negative or that subtraction sign being taken into that 6. It's kind of like that 6 becomes negative because that's there. We're still going in that direction of going backwards because of that negative, so we end up with the same answer. Technically, again, that would be considered same sign, keep the sign, because of that negative being next to that positive number. All right, let's look at another one. Let's say, for instance, this one looks a little bit tricky. We have a -3, so we're starting on that negative side. And we are going to subtract -6. We're going to put that -6 inside of parentheses so that it's not confusing. Let's begin with our number line here. So we're starting at -3. And let's start with some counters as well. So we are going to have 3 negative counters. We know that because our problem starts with a -3. And then we are going to subtract -6. Now, one thing that I often tell students is I ask them, how many lines does it take to create a plus sign? And they always tell me 2. What happens here is when you have 2 negatives next to each other, and mind you, that subtraction sign is acting as a negative, then it actually changes into a positive. So our problem will no longer be -3 minus -6. Our problem turns into -3 plus 6. These 2 negatives cancel out just like they do in English. A double negative actually means positive. we change it into a positive 6. Now, we can see that these two have opposite signs now. That 6 is still a positive at this point, and it is now that they have two opposite signs. If they have different signs, we subtract and we keep the sign of the larger number here. So in this instance, 6 is the larger number. Our final answer is going to be positive. 6 minus 3 is 3. We keep that larger sign, the positive, but we're going to go ahead and work it out anyways. So we're adding that positive 6 here. And we can already see that there's enough there to cancel out those negatives. And we are left with three positive counters. But let's look at it on the number line. So we would start at that negative 3. And in your original problem, it said minus. So we would think that we would be going to the left. But it says minus negative 6. Now, another way that I teach students how to do this is when they're looking at a number line, a negative means that you're changing your mind in some respect. So a negative 3 minus something. Okay, so minus tells us that we're going to the left. And then we said we have a negative 6, which means that we're going to switch and go the opposite direction now. So instead of continuing backwards down that number line, that second negative tells us to change our mind and we're going towards the positive direction. So we are at negative 3. Our direction is now to the right. And the number we're moving to the right is that 6. That's where you would cancel out. We're adding 6. And we're ending up with positive 3, just like our counters showed us.